Band Life Podcast! You are listening to the Band Life Podcast, your number one guide on how to run a profitable band. Here are your hosts, Pete Stannard and Adam West, the Wizard of Rock! Hello, and welcome to the Band Life Podcast. I am Pete Stannard, your host, and I'm here with my famously overdressed co-host, Adam West, the Wizard of Rock. Is it, may I ask, is it very cold in Wales at the moment?
No. But Bill Gates decided to block out the sun, didn't he, a year or two back, and so he decided Wales could go suffer.
We're going to do this episode in two parts. So we talk about musicians, songwriters, influencers, producers. We also get into the business side of it, where we talk about merchandisers, music supervisors, publishing, and agents.
Publishers,
in part two, publishers in particular, which is towards the end of this one. But management and record labels are going to be part two, which is a big one for our listeners. A whole raft of stuff, even how you work with musicians when you're first starting out, and how you need to have bargaining power, and without it, well, you're screwed. Essentially,
it's a learning curve, so get your notepad and pen ready. Yeah.
And there is a lot of information on this, on these next two episodes. So please stick with it, and you will learn so much from this. And I hope you will watch and listen to both of these episodes as a pair. Episode 9 is about bargaining power in the music industry. So why do we need it and how it works? And it's such a big topic. And for any of the listeners going, well, why would I need to know about bargaining power? I'm not with a record label. I'm not with a manager and all this other stuff. This actually applies right from the word go. Right? Stick with me on this one.
But get yourself a nice cup of tea.
Get a nice cup of tea, a notepad and pen. And ears on, mouth shut, as I tell my children when we're trying to read them stories at night. No, even if you're just starting out, this is going to be very relevant for you, and all will be revealed as we get through the episode. Artists in general tend to not really think about it too much, even though they're probably doing it right now to this day without even knowing about it. So what is, bargaining power, it's basically the backbone of how the music industry is run. Okay, whether you love it or loathe it, it's a reality of what it is. And it's in its purest form, it's actually quite simple. The more you have to bargain with, the better deals you're going to get. So this is sometimes called leverage, I suppose would be the other way of putting it, but that's more of an Americanism. So for our American friends, this is all about leverage.
All right, mate.
All right. That was more Australian. You galah. Hey, where's your Sheila? That sort of stuff. As you can tell, we are not very good with accents. My wife is the worst. She's just never get her to do an accent. It's like the worst thing ever.
Yeah,
but anyway,
just give it up.
Just give up on the accents. Like most things in their purest form, they're quite simple, but the devil really is in the detail. And this is where we're going to come from with this episode. And like I say, this does affect every band, a music artist, no matter what level they're at. You know, if you're just starting out, putting together a new band, if you're establishing, so you're just a little bit above that and you need management, right up to fully established and you're looking for signing a recording contract, you know, getting an agent, you know, publishing, merchandisers and all that, the full kit caboodle. This is relevant to you, but it's worth noting, people out there,
Right.
we are not music solicitors or lawyers or attorneys, depending on what part of the world you're in. And none of this should be taken as legal advice, okay? All contracts will be tailored to the act and the signatory entity that you're signing with. So the information in this episode is for rule of thumb, okay? And it should be taken as rule of thumb. It shouldn't be taken as verbatim, this is the law, because obviously we couldn't do that anyway, because the law here in the UK is going to be different in the US, it's going to be different in Australia, everywhere else. So do not take this as legal advice, which you probably couldn't anyway, because it's just too broad. But it should give you a really good idea of how this stuff works. Like I say, why is this important to music acts, no matter what level you're at? Generally, back in the day, what you would do is you would start a band, you'd go into a rehearsal room, like hash your songs out, and then you'd go and play live. Now, I think that's kind of turned on its head, but I'll get to that in a second. But it's not as easy as it used to be to do that. As Mr. West will vouch for, getting gigs these days is very different from getting gigs when we first started out, sort of playing live. It used to be a case of walking to a venue, say, can I play a gig Friday night? And they'd go, yeah, all right.
Oh, the happy days.
And that would be the end of it. You would show up on Friday and you would play your gig and then you'd walk away and that sort of thing. And the only kind of variable in that would be whether or not you get paid. And that obviously depends on how many people showed up and ticket prices and all that sort of stuff. Now it seems to be a case of you have to prove your audience to get the gigs in the first place, especially if you want to do any kind of headlining shows or anything like that. I suppose the reason that it was easier back then is because you couldn't prove an audience. You know, the internet wasn't really a thing. Social media just didn't exist. I mean, when I first started out as a teenager, I mean, we had a MySpace page. Not that anyone looked at it.
Yeah, I remember MySpace.
But it wouldn't even cross your mind to say to a promoter or a venue owner and say, look, we've got like 1,000 people on our MySpace page. It just wasn't a thing. And I think it's very much debatable why your followers on social media is kind of a credible thing to be an audience size in the first place. Because if you think about it, your Instagram followers are a global thing. So if you've got 12,000 followers on Instagram, it doesn't mean that 12,000 people are there in that geographical area of, of where you're playing that night. So I'm not entirely sure how that's credible. And we've talked in the past episodes about how I don't equate followers as a fan base by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's a ratio there, but it's definitely not a fan base.
Subscription and email, isn't it?
Yeah, if you subscribe, that would be a much truer account of what a fan base is, because they want to find out from you. They've been onto your website, which is very much about you, obviously. And if they've subscribed to a newsletter or something like that, then you can count them as a fan because, well, they want to know more from you. And they have the choice to unsubscribe at any point and that sort of thing. So, don't get too heartbroken if you get some unsubscribers in there. These things happen. When it first happens, you're a little bit, oh, why? What did I do?
Nothing. Why? You didn't post every day.
Yeah, exactly. They're just kind of, you didn't do anything for a while and then you popped up and they were like, well, I don't even remember this person now, so I'm just going to unsubscribe because they're clogging up my email, sort of thing. And that's probably more of it. If you were a lot more kind of consistent, they'd probably be like, oh, I mean, unless you kind of put stuff in there they don't want to hear about it.
It's a mammoth task. It's a full-time job, isn't it?
Very much so. But we will even come into that, Adam, in this episode at some point.
I shall hold my tongue and say nothing.
the forked tongue that you have, Mr. West. Okay, so everything is kind of turned on its head now, I think, for bands just starting out, because you have to prove an audience. The best way to build an audience is obviously online. And the best thing you could do to sort of kind of get that following is to release music at the end of the day. That's what people want to hear. Production has now become more of an emphasis for bands starting out as opposed to playing live, purely because of the way that you get gigs at the end of the day. So music production is now easier than ever to do. You know, back when I was a teenager and was playing in bands, you know, the only time we would go into a recording studio would be to record demos, and they would literally just be like a day, record like 3 songs, but live. This isn't full scale production. This is just set up, throw mics around,
that's all
play live. Yeah, and that's what you used to do. And that would be your demo, but your demo would be to give to promoters and venue owners so they get an idea of sound, not because you're trying to build an audience from it. It's just so you can go, this is what we sound like.
There's links in it.
Who do you put us with? Because the venues, they don't want to put, you know, a metal band on, you know, after a jazz band.
Well, they do now, don't they? They do it now. That's how much of a shit they don't go.
It seems a bit strange, but yeah, I don't know, maybe in Wales. I've never seen it here in Brighton, but maybe that's
jazz and death
thing.
metal is a cult thing, mate.
Is there a fusion thing going on between?
Well, check this out. Just a quick side note, because I know we've got a big gap.
Go for it.
Right, a singer from Opeth. So they're releasing finally a new album, and it's called The Last Will and Testament. And it's, they've already got the box set and the CD and all the digipack. It looks really nice. Very grey and very 1800s sort of look and dress they've got. But they've released their first single, and it's nice to hear that the growls are back. Amazing, but not a lot, just in small doses, which is kind of cool. So on the video, he does these quick flashes of each band member and stuff. And I looked at it and I'm like, hang on a minute, there's a name that triggered me. I'm like, that. I went back, I played it again, and then I still a screenshot of the video, and he's only got Jethro Tull. Like as a guest musician on there, and I'm like, well, that's very interesting, because Opeth really had a folky sound anyway, and Tull were a folky sort of prog band, and there's lots of elements that Opeth do, classical guitar and stuff, and I'm like, well, there you go, fusing a bit of folk classical with death metal. It can be done. So any Jethro Tull fans? Ian Anderson it's Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull. This, I think, guest appearance on Opeth's new album, The Last Will and Testament.
That's really interesting that they've got someone from Jethro Tull hitching back from our little side note. So now the music production has become obviously a lot more prominent as such for bands just starting out. The thing to remember is that obviously when I was a teenager and we were doing sort of demos and stuff, you know, we would literally just sort of go in for a day. And I think from memory, it was actually really quite expensive. It would cost us like a few £100 each to go in for the day. But to do like a full stack recording, like what you'd have to do now, that was unheard of. That was something for signed acts and things like that. And I think the only band that was kind of on the same sort of circuit that we were on at the time was Biffy Clyro, very small Scottish band at that point. And we were kind of doing the whole university circuits thing.
Cool.
Back then. And they were doing sort of small EPs and things like that. I think they were signed to a very small sort of independent label. You'd have to kind of build an audience first and then play live. That's kind of the way that it is now. From that perspective, and to give you an idea, sort of going back to the bargaining power thing, that is the leverage that bands have to have now to get a gig or to play larger venues. So right from the word go now, you have to have some kind of bargaining power, some kind of leverage for you to get that gig in the first place. But also, this is a crossover. You know, in past episodes, we talk about, I wear a creative hat and a business hat. This is one of the few subjects that has a crossover of creativity and business, because bargaining power is used, whether you know it or not, at the end of the day, bargaining power is used within the creative element, especially when you're finding musicians to be in your bands and things like that. If you look at it from the perspective of, you're a guitarist, Adam. Let's say that the Shallow Souls, your drummer quits, and he goes, I'm not doing it anymore. And you need to go and find a new drummer. Is the prospective candidates, quote unquote, are they more than likely to join your band or a band with a larger audience? Obviously, depending on the music. If you're looking at it from the perspective of, I really like the Shallow Souls, but I also really like this other band, the Unshallow Souls. But the Unshallow Souls have 2,000 Instagram
12K followers.
They've got the 12K followers. They've got 1,500 monthly listeners or 10,000 monthly listeners, all that sort of stuff. Which band are you going to join? At the end of the day.
That's an interesting point.
You've got that perspective there. And again, that's leveraging your audience to get what could be really good quality musicians. And then this is the same, if you think about it, when Taylor Hawkins died and Dave Grohl had to replace him, he didn't put it out on Facebook. At the end of the day, he ended up with Josh Freese, who's probably one of, if not the biggest session drummer in the world. His back catalogue is like, I think something like 400 albums he's drummed on. Something ridiculous.
What?
Like, seriously. After this, have a look at Josh Freese's back catalogue and you look at the amount of big names that he's drummed for is just absolutely insane.
And the Find Hours session people, they're all over the place, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. But Josh Freese, he's been doing it since he was like 10 as well. He's one of these prodigy drummers that he was doing like expos and stuff, drumming expos, at like 10 years old, things like that. So it's kind of built for it in a way. But anyway, enough about Josh Freese. The other element of that is band agreements, which I'm sure you have for the Shallow Souls, don't you, sir? You have a band agreement in place?
No.
No, most bands don't. And most bands don't think about it, but it is, especially if you speak to any kind of music solicitor, they'll be like, get a band agreement. Just put all these things out, because without an agreement, certainly from a legal perspective, any money coming in can only be distributed evenly amongst everyone else in the band.
Well, any money that comes in this band gets evenly distributed to me. At the moment, because I put the most in. It's like...
So you've kind of got an unwritten agreement. But if let's say that the Shallow Souls blew up and all that, you start getting lots and lots of money in, and the other band members get a little bit like, hang on, what's going on here? And if they were to bring some kind of legal suit against you, the only way that the law could come down on, because you don't have an agreement, is that all the money that is now coming in and previously coming in has to be evenly distributed. So if you've gone out and spent all that money, you'd have to find the money to to give it to them. It doesn't do well for band relations. I will make that as a note.
So, but how do you make something like that legal then? You can't just write up something and get everyone to sign it.
You can. As long as everyone signs it off. I mean, a lawyer or a solicitor could draw one up for you, but that would be a thing.
Wouldn't somebody have to be present if it's a legal document?
Not necessarily. I think as long as everyone has is on board with it, then it shouldn't be a problem as such. I can send you a template if you like, but it's one of those things. And again, it's what I come back to, is that if you don't have an agreement and it's fine if you're the person just sort of strumming guitars, but if you're the person like yourself who's sorting everything out and doing all the backroom stuff, as it were, So you're sorting all the gigs, you're doing all the rehearsals, you're sorting all the socials and all the merch and everything else. It's not such a great deal at the end of the day, because you're the one that's generating that income and you're not getting the rewards for it. That is one of those things, and something to be sort of thinking about early on as well, because once you get to a position, or if you get to a position where people start arguing about this stuff, like I say, they can backtrack stuff legally and say, well, you've taken the money, you need to be able to distribute that money evenly now.
Yeah, but if you've signed nothing in writing, then it's your word against theirs. So technically, you can go, well, surely there's no legally they haven't got anything to stand on. It's like, well,
no, because what they can do is say, look, let's say they take your merch, for example. They say, well, the merch has generated this amount of money because you've sold this. You have a paper trail or a digital trail, at least, going back that you've sold X amount over this period of time. And then they'll say, well, so you now need to distribute that money between the rest of the band because there's nothing to say that they haven't done anything. That's the way they look at it. Yeah, there's loads of stuff like this. It's also, when you play, have you registered your band with the PRS?
I tried to, but they needed a passport, and I don't have one.
See, because you're leaving money on the table as well. Because every time you play live, the PRS should give you, I think it's a minimum of £10 per gig. Under the license.
I think you suggested it, or somebody else, and I was like, yeah, I looked into it, and no, I think it was HMV or somebody, and I went, yeah, sure, I'll sort that out. You need a passport and a few other things. I'm like, well, I can, because I could. Well, it's to prove who you are, and like I don't have a passport yet. So
prove your citizenship, yeah.
So I'm a bit out of luck.
Yeah, because what happens is that the venues are obviously they should be PRS licensed. So the money from that license gets put into a big pot, and then it's distributed out to the bands that are registered. The money that's left over basically then goes to whoever has the biggest market share. So every time you play a gig, you're giving money to Ed Sheeran. Essentially.
What?
Because he has the biggest market share as an artist. So all of this unclaimed money gets distributed to the largest market share artist. So all of that money would go to, someone, Ed Sheeran or someone Ed Sheeran-esque. Whoever's Taylor very popular at the time.
Because we were talking about earlier the week.
Well, she's American, so that might be different. I'm not sure if she's she's probably with BMI or ASCAP as opposed to the PRS.
This is interesting. I need to drop that one to the band members, isn't it? Right, listen, guys, I'd like you to sign a document. So basically, I get money and you don't. No,
well, I mean, but that's the thing. But then this is the sort of thing that could steer them in that direction to actually do more. Is that you say to them, like, when we play a gig, I get like 60%, and you two get a share of 40%, so you end up with 20% each. That sort of thing. But if you do more, we'll do 30% each or 33% each, something like that.
Yeah,
after costs, of course. But
I think most musicians decide not to because they're like, well, look, we're all mates. Well, we don't know where this is going or what's happening, so we'll just go with the flow. But it's like you said, you got to have that business perspective and that creative perspective.
And it's not unheard of for bands to be very friendly in the beginning and not so friendly towards the end. I mean, look at Oasis. I mean, they're brothers and they hate each other. So,
well, they're both obnoxious anyway, aren't they?
They are as arrogant as each other. But
exactly, they probably can't stand their own arrogance. How ironic is that?
It is, isn't it? They literally repel each other. Yeah, I mean that's band agreements, and that obviously that's an internal thing that you guys need to sort out yourselves. And
send me a template and I'll have a look.
I can send you a template if you like. The other element of this is, and this isn't necessarily for band stuff, but certainly for other genres, is songwriters. So co-writers and ghost writers and things like that. if you've got good leverage or good bargaining power, you will get better deals from them, because usually they'll do an upfront fee and they'll do a royalty split, usually in like a point system, so it's a bit like music producers. But you could probably get that upfront money down if you can prove to them that you can get a bit more royalty, for example, because royalties are done as a percentage, royalty points is done as a percentage. So if they're, if you're saying to them, we'll give you 3 points, so you get 3% as opposed to 1% from royalties, but your upfront fee comes down a bit, then that kind of either balances out or is more profitable for them, then you're going to get that. And so I've got, I like doing a little tests for you, Adam.
Okay. Yeah. That's what I'm here for.
I can see if you've read the notes.
I have read all them notes. Didn't get to bed till 1 o'clock, and then when you said, I sent them all over, I'm looking, I go, I'll have a quick look before
I'll have
tomorrow.
A quick browse.
Because you're spring down on me. It wasn't supposed to be for another week. But there we are, I'll lay off. I'm looking through and going, there's a fucking essay. Like I said, I'm not reading all that before bed.
It's a big subject. But bands that have ghostwriters, okay, think mainly hair metal bands.
Yeah.
And these are bands that I looked into. I was actually quite surprised that they have ghostwriters. We've got Aerosmith, Bon Jovi, Kiss, Scorpions, and Alice Cooper as well.
Oh,
which is interesting.
Ghostwriters. Okay, so for the layman,
basically people who write their songs.
That's basically all it is. The ghost. I thought it was something they did for other people.
No. Ghostwriters, what they do, they come in and they write, but they're not necessarily accredited. That's where the ghost part comes in. Okay. And what tends to happen is over the years, because obviously these are kind of 70s, 80s bands, over the years, this stuff has come out. And especially like Aerosmith. I mean, I love Aerosmith. I think they're great. But I did not know that they had external songwriters to help them.
Makes you wonder.
Perfect their songs.
Out of those bands, which songs didn't they write? Which songs did the ghostwriters write? Because I would suggest that everything that we hear commercially online on the radio, etc., is actually the ghostwriters. So I'm not really listening to what you've done. I'm listening to what somebody else has done, and that other person's kind of sat on the beach with his pina colada, going, "That was me."
That was me. Okay. But the ghostwriters, or co-writers, they're quite well recompensed for their efforts. They get an upfront fee and they get their royalties and stuff like that. Especially back then, and probably not so much now. Like you say, Taylor Swift, even though she says she writes the songs, I know she has a staff of songwriters.
That's just lame.
I think a lot of it is coming from record labels and stuff. They want to ensure that their investment pans out in ways that
just a number of commodity, aren't you? It's quite sad.
A lot of the time, I'm afraid so. But it's finding that balance, and this is where, coming back to the bargaining power, you have to find, everything is a balance, and the bargaining power tips the balance in one way or the other. And this is why this subject is so important. This is why this episode is so important, because you can tip that balance more in your favor than on the other side. And that's kind of the beauty of the industry, depending on whether you've been screwed over or not, I suppose, from that statement. The other thing, which is quite a modern thing, certainly for new bands, is influencers. So social media influencers, that's a bit of a two-way street, trying to get your song onto big influencers like, I don't know, Mr. Beast or something like that.
Mr. Beast.
They're going to look to leverage each other's audience. So you're looking to get your music in front of his audience, and he's trying to get his videos in front of yours. And there's a two-way street thing. You've also got to be quite realistic about who you're messaging with this. The chances of you or I getting onto a Mr. Beast.
He's already said that, hasn't he?
As he said,
people.
Pete and Adam, we do not want your music. Go away.
Bugger off, you pair of hippies.
Very, very specific.
Yeah, no, I think you obviously get inundated with calls for people asking to be put on your playlist or in front. Or he's like, it's just way too many, And like,
it's one of those things, and I'm sure he will do it at cost. But even though he turned down $1 billion for his channel, he said it wasn't enough money.
Well, no, it's not. Not when you consider what is involved in it.
Yeah,
he's obviously got I guess, a semi-decent business head on his shoulders, unless somebody's one of his handlers are actually guiding him, because like it's all to do with this app thing he got as well. Like, and he's like, yeah, sure. And there's pictures of him like swimming in money, and you're like, oh, amazing.
Well, that's a part of his thing, is to give away money, isn't it? That he, at the end of each episode, he gives away like thousands upon thousands of dollars, or he gives away a car or whatever.
I don't reckon he's had help or support to do what he's doing. You just don't.
I would imagine so now, but I think starting out to get to where he is now, he's obviously put a lot of hard work. I think I saw an interview with him, and he said he spent just 2 years just analyzing YouTube videos to see what works and what doesn't. He started out just playing computer games on YouTube. But anyway, enough about Mr. Beast. This episode's too big to bang on about Mr. Beast. Another element for this, for new bands, are producers. If you want to work with a producer, a decent producer anyway, will take an upfront payment. So a bit like songwriters, an upfront payment and royalties, if there's any royalties to be had. If there's no royalties, then your upfront fee is going to be more. If there's royalties to be had, then there's a conversation to be had about bringing that upfront cost down, and then how many points that producer is going to receive as a royalty rate. Usually it's between 1 and 3 points, which basically translates to 1 to 3% of your royalties. So it's not a huge amount.
No, but they get a little something, don't they?
You get a little something, but also the other thing to think about, once you start factoring in everyone wanting a piece of your royalty, that 1 to 3% put over 100 people, you end up with nothing by that mathematics. Yeah. That's generally as a perspective from a new band starting out, obviously, but bargaining power, it's relevant right from the word go, especially if you're looking to do the live stuff and things like that. You can probably get a few gigs or something like that backing bands with no social presence at all. That's not unheard of. I've even spoken to promoters in Brighton, and they've said we don't actually need a huge amount, or if any, to get kind of an opening slot or something like that in certain venues. But they would like to have some proof of audience, because it's their job to fill the venue, and I think margins have become so tight for venues now that they just can't afford to open up and have an empty room at the end of the day. They have to sell booze at the end of the day.
That's all people want, booze and music.
Exactly. This is where bargaining power really kicks in, is if you want music industry representation of any kind. Just so people are aware what music industry representation is, it's things like management, and that could be personal and business, personal or / music manager or a business manager, agent, publishing, record labels, music supervisors, and merchandisers. And there's more, there's way more to that, but there's not enough time in the world to go over every point, okay? Obviously, all the deals that these different entities will try to give you will vary depending on how much bargaining power you have. And that is the point in this. So I think people are going to be probably way more interested in things like management than they are merchandisers. But we're going to start with merchandisers, because I know merchandise is one of your favorite things to talk about, Mr. West.
Oh, it's lovely. I love merch.
You love merch. It's
What don't I know about merch? Let's see.
Do you know much about merchandisers?
No, not really.
No. What is a merchandiser? Basically, merchandisers, they provide things like tour merch and merchandise for shops and e-commerce, or as they call it in the industry, D2C, which is direct to customer. Again, we don't have time to go over every point, so I've kind of whittled this down to what could be important, or what is going to be important at some point, hopefully. When bands get to a certain level, they can't keep up with the demands of selling merch. Yeah, at the moment, Adam, you're selling your merch at gigs, and you can kind of deal with sort of manning the merch stand yourself. Obviously, early on, when you first start playing and you've got merch and you've got your merch table, but when you get to a certain level, you can't do that anymore. And, it's not, I mean, you're not going to see Axl Rose manning a merch stand before and after a Guns N' Roses gig.
I'd like to see that.
I would love to. They would probably sell more merch, but
they might have to if he carries on singing the way he is. Poor bugger.
Bless him. I saw them at Spurs a year or so ago, and they were awesome. I thought they were great.
I think it's people dicking around with voice enhancer and just making it sound
I think what they're doing is they're just picking out his vocal and losing everything else. And that rarely sounds good anyway. Plus, you got to remember, he's 70 odd years old?
Oh, don't give me that excuse. People are still
give him a break. No, it's the same. It's the same with anyone. I mean, I saw Paul McCartney years ago, and people were like, "Oh, he's lost his voice." Blah blah blah. It's like
Ian Anderson lost his voice. Yeah,
he's like 1 billion years old. Give him a fucking break. He's. I went to the show, and he was great. Yeah,
1 billion years old.
Okay. Give him a break. He saw the formation of the stars. Give him a break. Okay.
I'm 1 billion years old. Have some respect.
Have some respect. He's a Beatle, for Christ's sake. Anyway, enough about Paul McCartney.
No, he's not, is he?
We're not going to go down this road, Adam, please.
I'm sorry.
It's tempting.
It was my fault last week. Everybody was
festering at the back of my head. Is like, do we go down the conspiracy of Paul McCartney? No,
because we got more hits on that video than everything else.
Oh, yes.
With all the fucking trolls. Just like, it was the pocket. Oh, never mind, whatever. You know,
never mind your tosser. Right. Anyway. Merchandisers. What do merchandisers do, Adam? What do you think they do?
Well, they provide a service to manage what merch that you have in large quantities, because it's something that obviously you can't do and do your daily thing. So obviously they will need something in return.
Yes, and this is where it gets very complicated. Merchandisers, what they do is they supply the merch and include logistics. Okay, and they keep track of what's been sold, what hasn't been sold, but they'll also sort out tax, border crossings and customs and things like that, which, as a side note, Brexit has made this way more difficult than it needs to be. It was so much easier when we were in the EU. We could just throw everything in a van, just drive over to France and do it. Now you've got to sort out visas, work permits, car nets, and all this other stuff. Even, right, this is the kicker that gets me, even you have to fill in a form about endangered species.
What?
Yeah.
What, for band merchandise?
For your instruments, actually. Not the merchandise, but your instrument. Yeah.
Oh, you're winding me up here now.
No. It's a fact. As a good example, if you've got a guitar that has a maple fretboard, for example, that is an endangered species of tree. My point is, the fucker's already been cut down. What are you going to do? Grow it back? At the end of the day. What? I don't know. But anyway. Right. I don't want to go off topic too much. But
no, that's fine.
But it's something that you never had to do when we were in the EU. They weren't too fussed.
Well, I didn't know that actually. So because I didn't, I just, well, I, don't, I just didn't know that.
Yeah, it was something that's really come back. There is Bruce Dickinson at the time, a massive Brexiteer. Then at the time, and then Brexit happened, and they went on tour in Europe, and he went, "This is the biggest mistake we've ever made."
And he was for Brexit.
He was very, very vocal about Brexit, and now
they usually
whenever they go on tour, because they've got to take their big jumbo jet and they've got to take all of their stuff, and the rest of Europe goes, "Oh, you bringing this in? Okay, it's going to cost you this amount for every country you go into, and here's all the paperwork you have to do to go with it." And Bruce went, "Oh, bugger." So he thinks Brexit was a massive, massive mistake, even though he went for it. And fair play to him, at least he admits the mistake. There are a lot of people out there that don't. That aren't.
I'm surprised, to be honest, because these are bit. Their band there is a business entity, isn't it? So,
yeah, it's a big thing.
Yeah, so you would have thought they would have covered that. Oh well, never mind.
Never mind.
He should have been on the Band Life podcast, and we would have.
He should have been. I would have explained it to him at the time, but I think he wasn't thinking. He was like, I suppose his point was probably more, "I'm doing this for my country." And
well, that's the problem, eh? They call it virtual signaling. Well, I'm doing it for my country. I'm doing it because I'm British. And you're like, okay, good luck with that. Because let's see if the British government care about you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not conspiracy. Okay, back to the bottom.
Tell that to the fishermen and stuff like that. But anyway, away from Brexit, back to merchandisers. So obviously, these merchandising companies, there is a deal to be had, and the bargaining power that you have will vary that deal. Okay. So bargaining power. And the thing to keep in mind is that what you're doing is you are licensing the right for that company to use your name and likeness. So you are giving away your name and likeness. And your
even
brand
with
as
like
a
even with like the Shopify thing as well.
Not so sure about the shop. Possibly you'd have to look in your terms and conditions. I don't know. I've not used Shopify as a merch thing.
It's like 1 billion pages, mate.
It's probably in there then, mate. Because they have to have permission to use your likeness, and they have to license that as a part of the legal process. So once they've got that license, they will then manufacture the goods, and they oversee sales at concerts, and then they will pay you whatever the deal is, depending on how you've done it. Generally, how it works is money for both parties is made through a royalty share of net profit. Okay, so net profit. That's money left after costs, because obviously you've got to pay for production, you've got tax, you've got credit card fees, you've got freight, haul fees, and all of that sort of stuff.
It's a lot now, isn't it?
It is a lot when you get to this stage of your career. So, haul fees. Do you know what haul fees are?
HALL.
Yep, HALL. No, okay. So haul fees are essentially how much the bricks and mortar venue is going to charge you for the privilege of selling merch at their venue. And well, it's not just that, but they're providing the staff to staff those those merch stands and the actual stands themselves. They don't come for free. You know, people don't work these things for nothing. And if you want merch in their venues, you're going to have to give them a percentage. So the stand.
Okay, sorry, mate. And we're talking about the big venues now, are we?
And you're not going to. I mean, I'd be very surprised if you get this at a small venue.
Just for my audience purpose, that's all.
Yeah. If you have this at a small venue, there's a negotiation to be had. So you can say, okay, yeah, well, you can charge us for a hall fee, but we're going to take more on the door, or we're going to take a percentage of the till. from your booze, something like that.
Okay.
There's always a negotiation to be had, Adam. This is the point of bargaining power. A standard hall fee is 25 to 30% after tax. Big acts have been known to get this down to about 10%, but I think that's a big chunk. Especially once you take into account like how much the merchandisers themselves are going to take and things like that.
Well, I told you, didn't I? There was a chap online breaking this sort of stuff down. He was a musician, and it was like, wow. By the time he finished, I'm like, what's the ruddy point like? You know, you're not really getting anything, really.
It's once you kind of really dig into this sort of stuff.
Wow.
So for most bands, the royalty share is around 75 to 80% of profits. That's obviously going towards the artist. This is from merchandisers. So once you kind of factor in that the merchandisers are going to take 25%, the hall fee is going to take 25%. You're not really left with a huge amount. So these rates can be elevated, though, if you're a bigger band. If you are what's considered to be a superstar band, so like the U2s, the Metallicas of the world, they've been known to get their percentage from gross. So before all the costs are taken out, they go, that's ours. You've got what's left, little merchandisers. Run along. But you have to be a big band to get that. And again, that's the bargaining power or the clout that band have. It's quite an interesting sort of prospect that, the more you have, the more you get. It's kind of the thing with this.
I get that, but it's like just sat here listening to you roll this off. I'm thinking, like, there's not an awful lot that you do get, really. I suppose I've seen a few big bands now doing some things that is a little bit out of character, and I have to wonder sometimes if it's because the caliber and level that they're at is like, well, look, we need to have this threshold and be above that. Anything under, and we're below what our outgoings are or what have you, and so
we're in the red. Yeah,
it's quite so that, because that's the problem when you end up taking the music or your band as a business. You suddenly realize, like for me, it dawned on me with the album, just doing the album for the better part of a year and a half, like, as bad as Metallica, is that the amount of work, even if you're just doing it on your own and sharing a small percentage of the workload, what I realized that not only is it's very, very time consuming, it's costly.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, it's energy draining. You can see why you be talking about is delegating the work. Like, it's in the end, like everybody goes, I can sort it out, and you're like, yeah, don't forget you got to factor in work and sleep on top of that, like, and you're like, whoa, it's been a learning curve for me. I'll give you that.
It is. It's a big undertaking, and
it is big undertaking.
All you have to do is listen to any past episodes to know what my viewpoint is on that. I don't think it should fall on one person in a band. No. I think that's a bit nuts. But anyway, coming back to the merchandisers alone, obviously, just like record labels and publishing deals, where there's royalties, there is advances. So what a lot of bands do is they'll get an advance from the merchandisers and they'll use that advance to pay for their tours. It's quite a common thing to do. The issue is, unlike record labels and publishers, the advances are returnable.
Yeah.
Okay. All advances, right, to make this clear, all advances are loans, but this is a returnable loan, which makes things a bit more tricky for you as an artist. So this means that the advance has to be paid back.
Yeah.
And sometimes they will even put interest on that advance. So this is very much like a bank loan. Well, it's different if from a record company advance, it's different because they are taking all the risk. If you can't pay it back, that's that. They're not going to come after your home. They're not going to repossess your car or anything like that. Whereas these guys, they can. There's ways around that, like becoming a limited company and all that sort of stuff, but we won't get into that. But it's something just to be aware of, that this is more like a bank loan as an advance as opposed to the sorts of advance that you will get from publishers or from record labels. Okay. And there are other aspects of the deal that you could use to your advantage if you've got a decent bargaining power, if you've got decent leverage. So things like the term, which is usually 18 to 24 months, if you can get that closer to 18 months, that'll be great. Advance repayment, you could add clauses and things like that in case the tour doesn't happen. If you get the advance and for whatever reason, I don't know, your drummer drops down dead the day before you go, then, there should be a clause in there for that sort of thing.
They're quite handy, aren't they, the clauses?
Again, all these little things can be put in, but they're only going to be accepted if you've got the bargaining power or if you've got the clout for them to go, okay, well, we trust that that's going to happen. And you can even kind of get clauses in there that, if the tour doesn't make any money or the selling of the merchandise doesn't make any money, then you're not going to get any of your money back, that sort of thing. But also exclusivity. Merchandisers don't want other people selling your merchandise for obvious reasons. So that usually as a part of the deal, what they'll put in is that you can't sell merch within 2 miles of a venue or 48 hours before the show. You look confused. If you're playing at a certain venue, you're not allowed to sell any merchandise 2 days before the show or within a 2 mile radius of that venue. Now, it might seem a bit weird, but let's say, for example, you're playing an arena, and one of the things that you do on your tour is to play a secret show that's close to the arena, like a night before. Well, under these terms and conditions, you won't be able to sell any merch at that secret show because it's, if it's within 2 miles and it's 2 days before the show, you can't sell any merch at that.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? So you could go, 3 miles out and do it 3 days before. But it's one of those things. And it's another thing that can be negotiated, because if that's something that you do regularly as a part of your tour, for example, is to do a secret show close to the venue at that sort of time, you can say, well, we do, be honest, say, we do a secret show before and we'd like to sell some merch while we're there.
And that's obviously if you're signed as well then, is there?
No, well, if you're signing to a merchandiser, you don't necessarily have to be signed to a record label. That's a merchandiser is its own company, it's its own entity. The other thing is things like creative control, what actually goes onto the T-shirt itself. And obviously, if they're merchandising into tour, you're going to have the tour dates generally on the back of your T-shirt, but if they're putting into shops and things like that, they generally don't have tour dates on there. And generally the stuff that you buy online doesn't have the tour dates on the back, and that sort of thing. And the other thing is bootleggers. So basically who chases down bootleggers and who brings them to justice. It should be the merchandisers under the agreement. So what you could then do is that after the show, if you see people selling stuff outside, you can say to them, well, hang on, you're now void of your contract because people are selling bootleg stuff.
Do you remember that girl that was in the days?
Oh, back in the day, yeah.
I was like, what's all that about? Why? My mate said to me, 95, like, these are the bootleggers.
Yeah.
He said, you gotta be careful. Some of them are not very good quality. You want to get the originals inside, but they'll charge a lot less.
They'll charge a lot more.
It's risky
in
though,
the venue.
Yeah, risky doing all that bootleg stuff.
It's risky to do that, yeah. And you always used to see it, they'd always have it on a blanket and a piece of string. You just see a piece of string around their around their wrists. So what they could do, if the old bills show up, they just literally just pull the string and it just soups everything up, and then they leg it. I've just seen happen, which is genius. I thought I was like, kudos to that. That's just really, really, because obviously it's going to take time for them to pack everything up, and they literally just drawstring and then run. It becomes a sack that they just put around.
That's amazing.
Which is great.
Just because I'm piss poor.
And they're all wearing striped shirts and a little mask with a swag bag on the back, obviously.
So imagine, yeah.
So all of these points can be negotiated, and obviously the more leverage or the more bargaining power you have, the better that deal is going to be. But the point here is that there's so many facets to just selling merchandise at a certain level that this whole thing just becomes a big minefield within itself. And if you're not on top of this, even though you've got one person going, I'm going to take 20%, another person saying I'm going to take 30%. And it's like, well, hang on. If you've got 20%, you've got 30%, you've got another 15%, you've got another, how much are we going to end up with is the kind of the bigger thing. And then, then you've got to sort of spread that out between, 4 or 5 of you. You generally don't get left with a lot. So moving on from merchandisers, another entity that might be coming into your sphere as a music artist are music supervisors. Now, the reason that I've added this is because this is actually a really great way for music artists to make money, because licensing your music for film and television, and that's what music supervisors do. They add music to film and television.
Yep.
You can make a lot of money. You can make a big return. I dread to think how much the Rembrandts have made from the title sequence of Friends, for example.
Interesting.
Huge amounts of money, because they're a title sequence. So you get more money for being in the title sequence than you will if it's just in that little bit. When you got like a transition thing and you got like a little bow, bow, bow. Someone will get a royalty for going bow, bow, bow. Yeah,
10 quid, please. Thank you.
There's £10. Thank you very much. But if you did that for Friends, that's been running for what, 30 odd years in how many countries, and it's still being run to this day. That that was an actual song. It was a released song as well, and the cast were in the actual music video from memory. But these film supervisors or music supervisors, they can earn a lot of money. They charge anywhere between 25 to 100,000 per film. That's just to kind of place music. But they also get a royalty if it's put into a soundtrack, which is usually 1 to 2%. And that 1 to 2% generally is escalated by another 0.25% or 0.25 or 0.5% if the soundtrack hits what's called an STEA, which is a streaming equivalent album. Now, for those not in the know, a streaming equivalent album is if you have 1,500 streams, the industry perceives that as the sale of an album. So if you're connecting the physical, back in the day when you sold a physical album, that would be considered a sale, an album sale. Because everything's digital, they've had to work out an equivalent, and they're saying that 1,500 streams is the equivalent of an album sale. Now, this is important because certain albums back in the day, they would get a gold disc or a platinum disc. If you sold 500,000 albums, you get a gold disc. If you sold 1 million albums, you would get a platinum disc. If you hit gold or platinum with a soundtrack, the music supervisor will get either 1.5% or 2.5%, all depending on the deal that you've brokered at the time with that music supervisor. So again, this comes down to bargaining, but it also affects, if you're signed and things like that, it affects because the royalties that you make are recouped. So you may get delayed with your royalties if this, because you've got to pay the music supervisor first before the artist. The artist is always the bottom layer.
Well, but of course, they're the ones doing all the work. Why would you want to get anything?
So, everything filters down to the music artist, and then the music artist gets what's left over. So that's something to be thinking about. Well, that's the way it works. Take it up with the industry. All I can do is deliver the bad news, I'm afraid, Adam. But it was something that was quite interesting that I actually noticed last night. Last night, I sat down, one of the rare evenings that I sit down with my wife and just watch telly. And we only ever watch like Netflix or one of the streaming things. And we do it through a PlayStation. That's what we use as a kind of conduit to watch the different things. And on the TV page, it came up with an ad for the soundtrack to the new Deadpool film.
Right.
To go and listen to it on Spotify. So, and I thought, that actually becomes quite relevant to this section of what we're talking about. Because if you think about it, if that's going on PlayStation, it's probably going on Xbox, it's probably going on to all the smart TVs around the world as a page. Because I can't imagine Spotify just go, we're only going to advertise in one area.
They're going to be all over the place. Aren't they?
Yeah. And, so that that soundtrack is probably generating quite a lot of royalties, quite a lot of streams. So this then becomes quite relevant because if you are hitting that platinum status, and kind of the top end of that is going to be that 2.5% of your royalties are going to be going to that music supervisor. So that's quite an interesting.
It is. I had no idea about it, to be honest. There's so many levels, isn't there, if you think about it?
There's so many facets to this. And this, honestly, this is just the stuff that I've pulled out because I thought it's going to be kind of relevant at the early stages and something to think about moving forward. So that was quite a short one for for music supervisors, but I thought it's quite relevant in case you get into a film of some sort or something like that. We
were talking about putting out a soundtrack to a film or movie, so
yeah, that might be an interesting thing to do. And then it depends on what deal you're going to make with whoever's made that film, whether it's, especially if a studio's involved. But they also, music supervisors do things like say for television, and it's the same sort of thing. It's just the numbers are slightly lower. I think generally they're going to give like $8,000 or something for music supervisors to get paid, $8,000 per episode or something like that. I think was the biggest numbers that I saw. But the concept is exactly the same from film as it is to television. It's just the actual numbers are slightly different. The next section that I've put into this is publishers, which are very similar to music supervisors, but they also do other things like TV commercials and stuff like that. But the reason that I've put this in is because bands or artists are leaning more towards publishers than getting a recording contract because the deals are generally better for the artist. As a bit of a history lesson for you, Adam.
Go for it.
Historically, publishers ran the music industry. They were the most important element of the music industry because they were a bridge between songwriters and artists. So if you go back to like the 1940s where you had a lot of singers, they didn't write their own songs. They had to get songwriters in to produce the records. And the publishers, or any publisher worth their salt, they owned the songwriters. What they would do, and the famous thing is Tin Pan Alley. Have you heard of Tin Pan Alley in the States? It's basically back then, Tin Pan Alley was a place where all the offices for the publishers were. So the way that things worked was the record company would need a song for their artist, who would be a singer, for example. And so they would go to a publisher and say, what songwriters do you have to work with, I don't know, Aretha Franklin or something like that, for example. And they would go, well, we've got this one, this one, this one, this one, and we'll write you a song. And then they would pay the publisher, and the publisher would then pay the songwriter. Obviously, over time, this has changed because most acts now write their own songs. What the publishers are doing is they're doing deals that are kind of better for the artist because they're looking at them from more of just a songwriting entity as such. Publishing houses or publishing companies, they tend to have fewer moving parts than a record company. So there's less outgoing for that company. So, I mean, a small publishing house can consist of like 3 members of staff as a minimum. Whereas a record label, you've got, legal, A&R, you got the executives, all the other facets of putting together a record label. Whereas a publishing house, you have an administrator who takes care of the copyrights, the licenses, collecting money and paying writers and things like that. You have a song plugger. They basically get placement for your songs in film, television.
See, that's not a bad position to be in.
Yeah,
because that's very prominent now on the socials, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people.
And then you'd have a creative person, which is someone who ensures that the songwriting is up to scratch, but they may find co-writers and ghostwriters if you need it. And they're very similar to like the A&R department of a record company. The kind of the bargaining power of this comes into the actual deals themselves between you as an artist and that publisher. Traditionally, it was a 50-50 split. It tends to be less now. I think it's more towards the artist now, whereas a record company, if you get a 10% split, you're pretty good on it.
Oh, they say 10% is better than nothing at all, right?
Yeah, but with this, you get at least a 50%.
Publishers, make notes, people, make notes.
Yeah,
publishers.
So if you're thinking along the lines of let's get a record label, you might want to think about getting a publisher instead.
I'll be the publisher as well. So I'll take on the publisher role.
You're going to be the song plugger.
Yeah, well, we kind of do that anyway, don't we?
We do, but I think song pluggers generally they have like a network of people within the film, television. They know people in ad agencies and things like that that are going to want music for adverts and that sort of stuff. So if you're researching publishers. I would be looking very much at the song plugger and what kind of network they have and where music has been placed and things like that. So it really depends on your research and how much bargaining power you have to strike a good deal. Bad Life Podcast!